In the stillness of a spring dawn in the year 1623, a piercing cry ripped through the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace. It was not the groan of a wounded soldier, nor the desperate plea of an enemy dragged before the throne. It was the scream of a girl only 15 years old. Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of the world's most powerful ruler, filled the palace with a sound so chilling that even the eunuchs guarding the gilded doors recoiled. They had seen executions, poisonings, and the strangling of princes with silk cords, but this was different. It was a cry forbidden to be heard, an echo of something the empire wished to silence. What happened that morning was not a family tragedy, nor a passing misfortune. It was the unveiling of a ritual so deeply woven into the imperial machine that it had survived centuries, hidden beneath ceremony. A ritual that carved its price not into skin alone, but into spirit. Every daughter of the Sultan carried this weight, a debt exacted before they were even women. For Fatma, the moment had arrived. Her scream was not from wounds of the body, but from the shattering of her will. For over 6 centuries, the Ottoman dynasty perfected a preparation for its princesses that was as polished as it was sinister. The chronicles of the empire made no mention of it. Court historians, careful scribes of power, erased it with a stroke of their reed pens. Yet fragments endured. Secret medical notes, coded memoirs, forbidden testimonies whispered in corridors. And only recently, in the quiet dust of Istanbul's archives, did the evidence resurface, revealing what the golden veils had long concealed. The world has always envied the fate of Ottoman princesses. From Paris to Isfahan, from Moscow to Cairo, women dreamed of their imagined lives. Silks draped across their shoulders, jewels sparkling at their wrists, endless servants at their beck and call. But behind those glowing walls lay not luxury, but a nightmare one so unbearable that many of these young women prayed for death rather than for their wedding night. The empire clothed its cruelty in perfumes, its violence in ritual, until pain itself became ceremony. And that is what this tale will reveal to you. Not a fairy tale, but a chronicle of horror disguised as grandeur. A scream buried under centuries of silence, echoing still if you know where to listen. Before we continue, I ask only one thing. If this truth already makes your heart tremble, mark your presence, here subscribe, share, and in the comments, guide us to the next story you wish to unearth. Shall it be Marie Antoinette? Cleopatra? Anne Boleyn? Your choice will shape the next revelation. Now walk with me. Step past the gilded doors. Look beyond the silken curtains. For we are about to uncover why so many Ottoman princesses, born in palaces of gold, longed instead for the cold embrace of the grave. The Ottoman Empire stretched like a boundless ocean, swallowing coastlines, rivers, and mountains into its dominion. For more than 6 centuries, from 1299 until the early 20th century, it thundered across 3 continents. Its armies marched with a rhythm that shook the earth, their banners casting shadows from the gates of Vienna to the burning deserts of Yemen. Few empires in history could rival its sheer longevity, its ability to entwine both East and West in a single grasp. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the city did not simply change rulers. It was reborn. Renamed Istanbul, it became the beating heart of imperial ambition, the place where the Ottomans stitched together the destinies of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. At its center stood Topkapi Palace. More than a residence, it was the empire made stone. Courtyards perfumed with rosewater, chambers glowing with mosaics, treasuries bursting with emeralds and pearls seized from fallen kings. Yet for all its splendor, it was also a labyrinth of silence, a place where lives were reshaped as ruthlessly as borders on a map. Hidden within those walls lay the imperial harem, a world as vast as a small city. At its height, it held over 800 women concubines, attendants, tutors, and princesses, each breath regulated, each gesture calculated. The harem was cloaked in silk and secrecy. To outsiders, it appeared to be a paradise of beauty and desire. In reality, it was an arena where silence was as sharp as any blade, and ambition was measured in whispers and glances. Here, a misplaced word could banish a woman to obscurity. A single night with the Sultan could transform a slave into the mother of an heir. The harem's purpose changed over time. By 1530, when Suleiman the Magnificent elevated his beloved Hrem Sultan from concubine to legal wife, the harem ceased to be a mere chamber of pleasure. It became a theater of politics. Intrigue, alliances, betrayals, all played out behind lattice windows and veils. Between 1533 and 1656, in what historians call the Sultanate of Women, figures like Qasim Sultan and Turhan Hatta Sultan ruled empires without ever wearing a crown. They guided councils, decided wars, shaped treaties. Behind every decree stamped with the Sultan's seal, a woman's hand often lingered. And yet, there was a bitter irony in this glittering empire of silks and power. The concubines often enslaved women, torn from their homes in Eastern Europe or purchased in North African markets, could ascend to extraordinary influence. They could rise from nothing to become Heseki Sultan, queen in all but name. But the daughters of the Sultan, royal by blood, were denied that possibility. The concubines fought and schemed for freedom. The princesses, gilded and adored, were trapped in invisible cages. Their destinies were bound not to their will, but to their father's political needs. Amid this empire of shadows and splendor, a child was born in 1606, who seemed destined to outshine them all. Fatma Sultan, daughter of Sultan Ahmed I, and the formidable Qasim Sultan, opened her eyes in a world of perfumed gardens, silver fountains and libraries filled with manuscripts gathered from Persia, Arabia, and Byzantium. Her childhood was gilded, yes, but it was also extraordinary. Chroniclers marveled at her beauty, but even more at her mind. Unlike many royal daughters whose lives were measured only by the alliances they could forge, Fatma reached for the stars literally. From the age of 7, she studied the night skies with an intensity that astonished her tutors. She devoured works of astronomy, traced the movements of Venus, memorized the constellations. Scholars noted her skill with the astrolabe, her ability to debate learned men in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. By the time she was 12, she could recite Persian poetry with grace, annotate Quranic law, and even draft maps of distant lands. She was a prodigy, her brilliance shining like a beacon inside the palace walls. But brilliance in a daughter of the Sultan was both blessing and curse. Every achievement, every word of praise from scholars and poets, was a reminder of what could be yet would never come to pass. For from the very moment of her birth, her fate had already been sealed. Unlike her mother, who had risen from the uncertain status of a concubine to the throne's most powerful woman, Fatma's destiny was predetermined. She was not meant to rule, not meant to guide councils or command armies. She was a coin in the empire's treasury of power, to be spent when loyalty needed to be bought. That day arrived sooner than she could imagine. Before she reached womanhood, her hand was promised to Kerem Mustafa Pasha, a hardened commander nearly 2 decades her senior. He had earned his reputation in bloody battles against Persia, proving his loyalty with scars that still marked his body. For him, this marriage was no romance. It was a ladder, each rung climbing higher into the empire's favor. For Fatma, it was the beginning of tragedy. The decision was not hers to question. No scholar's admiration, no poem she had composed, no star she had traced in the sky could alter her father's decree. As the empire's daughter, she was not seen as a person, but as an instrument, a bridge of loyalty between the throne and its generals. The brilliance of her mind, the tenderness of her childhood, all dimmed beneath the crushing truth. She was to be married not as a woman, but as a symbol. 3 months before the wedding, Fatma was thrust into a process so carefully crafted, so sinisterly polished, that it existed only for daughters of the sultans. It was known as Tervive-Mubarak, the sacred education. The name itself sounded holy, almost protective, but its true purpose was the opposite. It was not designed to prepare her for life, but to unmake her, to strip away every trace of individuality and rebuild her into an obedient shadow. The woman charged with this task was Gulnar Hatun, 60 winters old and as unyielding as the marble pillars of the palace. She had overseen more than a dozen such trainings. To her, a princess was not a child of flesh and dreams, but a vessel to be reshaped, molded until not a spark of resistance remained. Under her supervision, Fatma was led into the bridal chamber Angelino Dace. Its walls shimmered with Persian carpets and ebony panels, but beauty here was deception. It was no sanctuary. It was a prison draped in silk. From dawn until noon, Fatma endured endless rituals of reverence. She learned 18 distinct forms of bowing, a tilt for greeting, another for waiting, another for lying still until summoned. Even her walk was no longer her own. She practiced Sess's measured steps, her head tilted precisely 30 degrees, her hands never raised above her heart. She became an instrument of gestures, each movement rehearsed until her very posture surrendered. But the cruelest lesson was in speech. Her voice, once so curious, once bright with questions of stars and scripture, was reduced to a lexicon of 43 approved words. Yes, thank you, forgive me, at your service. Words of gratitude, apology, submission, never of thought, never of will. To stray beyond these boundaries was to invite punishment, fasting, hours in solitary darkness, or humiliation before the gathered harem. Imagine a girl of 15, who had debated scholars and penned poetry, suddenly stripped of her tongue, her words caged until they no longer belonged to her. The final blow was the tribunal. Fatma's obedience was judged not only by eunuchs and matrons, but by her own mother, Sem, Sultan Jadi. To the world, Sem was the most powerful woman of her age, guiding wars, manipulating statesmen, ruling the empire from behind the veil. But before her daughter, she became judge, not mother. Fatma's tears were weighed as weakness, her silence measured as defiance, her gestures scrutinized not as expressions of pain, but as the currency of power. Each day, the girl who had once spoken of the constellations learned instead to fold herself smaller, quieter, until her voice was not her own. It was the first step in erasing Fatma, Sultan, princess, scholar, dreamer, and replacing her with something else, a wife shaped not by love but by command. Beneath the glittering courtyards of Topkap lay a hidden world, the underground bridal chambers. Few outside the palace ever knew of them, and fewer still dared to speak of what occurred there. They were replicas of nuptial rooms, built not for celebration but for rehearsal mock stages, where Ottoman princesses were forced to endure their first lessons in submission to the marriage bed. It was here that Fatma faced the next step of her education. The chambers were dim, their walls lined with candles that flickered against Venetian wax mannequins' figures, carved with anatomical precision, crafted to resemble husbands she had yet to meet. The instructors, cold and unyielding, ordered her to perform gestures no 15-year-old should have known. Every reaction, her trembling hands, her tears, her instinctive recoil, was carefully noted in secret records. The more she resisted, the harsher the conditioning became. Averted eyes were punished with hours of stillness. Sobs were silenced with isolation. Slowly, the girl who once read the skies was dragged down into a darkness where even innocence was forbidden. When the rehearsals ended, Fatma was moved to the Jalan KK, the bride's pavilion. Isolated from the laughter of courtyards and the music of fountains, it was a chamber wrapped in luxury that concealed its true purpose. Everything she consumed was dictated by design: pomegranates to symbolize fertility, honey and almonds to sweeten the body, goat's milk spiced with cinnamon from Yemen. The attendants explained them as blessings. In truth, they were part of a regimen that left her body pliant and her will dull. Each day she was bathed in oils infused with valerian, poppy, and orange blossom alchemical blends prepared by scholars of Cordoba and Samarkand. Some calmed her, others blurred her thoughts, a few induced a drifting sense of detachment. It was medicine masquerading as ritual, designed to soften resistance while preserving outward beauty. But the most insidious weapon of all was reflection. The walls of the pavilion were draped with embroidered tapestries, showing scenes of the ideal wife, obedient, fertile, smiling as she bent before her husband. Between these hung Venetian mirrors, polished so brightly that Fatma could see herself at every turn. What had once been a Sufi practice of mystical self-examination, muraqabah, was twisted into a form of control. Every gesture, every flicker of rebellion on her face, stared back at her in unyielding glass. She became her own jailer, forced to monitor her thoughts even in silence. In this prison of silk and mirrors, Fatma began to realize the truth. Her body, her voice, her very mind, no longer belonged to her. The girl who once dreamed of the constellations was being dismantled piece by piece until only obedience remained. The palace had achieved what it intended, not simply to prepare a bride, but to erase a daughter. March 15th, 1623. Istanbul awoke like a heart overflowing with blood and music. From the break of dawn, the city pulsed with celebration. Drums thundered through the streets, janissaries marched in glittering armor, and clouds of incense rose from every mosque. The people gathered in droves, craning their necks to glimpse the splendor of a princess's wedding. For them, it was a vision of paradise, golden trays piled with roasted lamb and sugared almonds, dancers from Andalusia spinning in jeweled silks, musicians praising the empire's glory with flutes and tambourines. The empire wanted them to see joy, strength, eternity. Inside the palace, the spectacle was even more dazzling. Banquets stretched across tables of mother-of-pearl, wine and sherbets poured into crystal cups, poets recited verses extolling the union of blood and loyalty. But at the heart of this celebration sat Fatma Sultan, silent as marble. Chroniclers note that while laughter and music roared around her, her lips were cracked with thirst, her gaze unfocused. Palace physicians recorded what we would today recognize as panic attacks, trembling hands, shallow breath, sudden chills despite the warmth of spring. The city was drunk on glory, yet within the princess, terror spread like a shadow over the soul. When the final toast was raised and the feasting ended, the true ceremony began, the dreaded procession to the nuptial pavilion. Designed centuries earlier under Muhammad the Conqueror, the building rose in octagonal perfection, each of its 3 levels devoted to a different stage of submission, purification, surrender, and consummation. It was architecture as weapon, a structure built not for beauty but for domination. On the first level, Tiherkat, Fatma underwent hours of ritual purification. Marble tubs were filled with rosewater, sandalwood, and ambergris brought from Somali coasts. Alchemists added diluted opium and mandrake, substances meant to induce calm, compliance, even a strange, floating ecstasy. To witnesses, she appeared serene, her body yielding to the hands that bathed her. But serenity was a mask, one crafted by drugs and exhaustion. The second level, Teslimkat, the floor of surrender, transformed her into a bride. She was dressed in white silk embroidered with gold thread, her gown heavy with pearls sewn from the Gulf. At first glance, it was majesty incarnate, but hidden within were chains, clasps designed to restrain, shoes weighted to slow her steps, a crown so heavy it forced her head into a posture of submission. What looked like finery was in truth a cage. Meanwhile, her husband-to-be, Kara Mustafa Pasha, was not adorned with beauty but armed with instructions. In a chamber nearby, seasoned counselors trained him not in tenderness, but in dominance, phrases meant to humiliate, gestures designed to intimidate, methods to ensure obedience. His preparation was a soldier's manual, not a lover's guide. The final level, Sayef-Kat, awaited. Its walls were draped with scenes of conquest, cities razed, armies defeated, captive women kneeling before victors. Every tapestry screamed the same message: marriage was not union but victory, the bride not a partner but a prize. It was here, in this chamber designed as a battlefield, that Fatma was to face her most dreaded night. When the doors of the Sayef-Kat closed, the celebration outside faded into silence. Inside, the chamber loomed like a stage set for conquest. Tapestries of fallen cities and chained princesses gazed down from the walls, as if mocking the girl who now stood trembling in her bridal gown. Fatma Sultan, once radiant with brilliance and curiosity, was reduced to a fragile figure, trapped in layers of silk that felt heavier than armor. The first moments were recorded in secret notes later unearthed from palace archives. Fatma's body shook with uncontrollable tremors. Her eyes wandered as though searching for escape in an unseen world. This state was known as sakma, a collapse of spirit so complete that the body remained while the soul fled. Kara Mustafa Pasha, seasoned in war and conquest, mistook her silence for arrogance. He believed she was defying him, and so he applied the lessons taught by his counselors, words sharpened to humiliate, gestures of intimidation, calculated displays of power. But there was no resistance to overcome. There was only absence. The consummation, forced after hours of failed attempts, was marked in coded medical records with chilling precision. Internal bleeding, repeated fainting, Ru Sukmek, the departure of the soul. In modern words, she dissociated so deeply that survival meant abandoning herself. That night, the empire won its victory not over Persia, not over Europe, but over one of its own children. The days that followed revealed the true cost. Fatma's voice withered into whispers, spoken only when directly addressed. Her appetite vanished so completely that attendants had to feed her by hand. Hours passed in weeping without reason, her sobs echoing through the pavilion like the cries of a wounded bird. Worst of all, she developed what palace physicians called the sickness of fear. The mere presence of a man, even the eunuchs who had guarded her since childhood, sent her into panic. Rapid breath, cold sweats, sudden fainting. Doctors of the age diagnosed her with virginal melancholy, a term that veiled trauma behind polite language. Remedies were tried. Infusions of herbs, music played on the oud Sufi prayers whispered at her bedside. None restored her light. The girl who once debated scholars and charted the stars had vanished. In her place remained a hollow shell, obedient, vacant, lifeless. Her books gathered dust, her astronomical instruments lay untouched, the gardens where she once laughed fell silent. The empire had succeeded in shaping a dutiful bride, but in the process it extinguished a soul. The tragedy of Fatma was not a single night of horror, but a living death that stretched on for years. Fatma Sultan lived on for nearly 3 decades after that night, but not as the brilliant girl who once traced the constellations. She became a figure of ceremony, a body draped in silks, a voice summoned only when duty required. Her marriage with Kara Mustafa Pasha continued. In appearance, children were born, rituals performed, formalities observed, but behind the embroidered curtains there was only distance. Mustafa himself sought refuge in endless campaigns and the haze of opium, as though he too was haunted by the knowledge that he had been the instrument of her undoing. Fatma survived, but she did not live. Her brilliance was buried under obedience, her laughter silenced by fear. And in 1652, at the age of 46, she died. Official records named her cause as brain fever. Yet, courtiers whispered that her death fell on the anniversary of her wedding night, as if the weight of memory had at last pressed her soul into silence. Her story was not unique. Palace records uncovered centuries later revealed dozens of princesses who endured the same fate. Some were left mute, speaking only to themselves in empty chambers. Others dissolved into madness, their names scratched from chronicles. A few, with unimaginable courage, tried to resist faking their deaths to escape remarriage, inventing secret codes to communicate with sisters, or even daring to petition the Sultan himself for divorce. Their acts of defiance, small sparks in suffocating darkness, remind us that even in the deepest prisons, the human spirit still searches for freedom. History, of course, tried to bury these truths. Official chroniclers painted the harem as a paradise of silks and perfumes, of poetry and refined pleasures. They wrote of princesses as radiant emblems of empire, never as broken daughters. The silence was deliberate, a mask placed over suffering to preserve the illusion of grandeur. Yet in hidden manuscripts, in the medical notes of palace physicians, in the whispered testimonies of attendants, another story survived. A story of chains invisible but unbreakable, of cries muffled by ceremony, of women sacrificed not for love, but for politics. Fatma's tragedy forces us to confront a cruel irony. Absolute power did not protect her. It devoured her. And in doing so, it revealed a truth that reaches beyond the Ottoman court. Behind every glittering crown lies a foundation of suffering. Behind every royal marriage, a price paid in silence. The scream that tore through Topkap in 1623 was not the only one. It was simply the one loud enough to echo through centuries. To hear it now is to strip away history's gilded mask, to see that behind palaces of gold were lives reduced to shadows. And so we are left with questions. How many voices remain buried under ceremony? How many truths were silenced in the palaces of Europe, Russia, China? Fatma Sultan's life is not just a tale of the Ottomans, it is a reminder that power, in every age, has demanded sacrifices hidden from the world's gaze. If this story unsettled you, if it made your heart tremble, then join us as we continue to peel away the silken veils of history. Subscribe, share this tale, and tell us, whose fate should we unveil next? A Russian Tsarina who feared her own mother? A Chinese empress, bound in ritual chains? Or a European princess traded like coin for peace? Your voice will guide us to the next truth, waiting to be unearthed. Because only by listening to the silenced can we finally understand the true cost of crowns.